Metrology is measurement, and any measurement is any magnitude in comparison to a fixed magnitude that's regarded as a standard. That's about it. My book, because people here are interested in the science of the ancient world, principally stone circles and things, then I've done a pretty good analysis of stone circles and the measurements they actually used. Not just in stone circles, you find these measurements used everywhere. So I was interested in metrology because basically it's the nuts and bolts of any ancient culture, and we can construct more knowledge of the ancient world through study of its metrology than you can perhaps through study of the monuments, because the metrology is in the monuments, and that's how you can show the relationships between all the different monuments in different parts of the world. They're all using the same system, so it was a totally universal system. Well, it was reading the works of people like John Michel, who wrote View Over Atlantis in the 60s, and of course that inspired us all, and the measurements came into it a good deal, but they weren't very accurate, and it was very unsatisfactory, so I decided to research the thing to determine what these measures were, and when I started doing that, I found that there's no generally agreed standard for any of the ancient measurements. You know, there's sort of averages taken, but average is no good because they mask any differences there might be that could be deliberate, you see. So I found that there were
well, I wish I could have heard it.
Nobody's consult on the matter. There's no books on the subject. There's thousands of books on other things that are much woollier, like language. You know, you could. There's nothing really concrete about language. You can make it up as you go along. But measurements you can't. They're fixed. I've never quite thought of it like that, but it doesn't matter how ancient the site or from where it is in the world, you will find through analysis of its dimensions what the intended unit of measurement was, and as far back as you can go, these units of measurement are there. I mean, you've only got to look at, say, Stonehenge. The original parts of Stonehenge, the curses and various things, were laid out in 3,400 BC, so that's over 5,500 years ago. And Petrie was able to give you regular measurements. His 1882 survey, Stonehenge plans and descriptions, will give you his analysis of the measurements that we use, and there were rigidly adhered to the measurements, particularly in the rest of Stonehenge. It was a later development. It was built in several stages, but these stages covered over 1,000 years, and you find each stage of Stonehenge is an elaboration on the geometry that was already there in its original design, because part of the first bit of the design was the Aubrey holes. The interesting thing about it is it was so continuous, and the reason for its preservation in its exactitude right up until the adoption of the meter, the various nations of the world kept these measures exactly as they were in prehistory. So it's constant use that keeps them going. And if a measure were ever lost, I mean, through sort of invasion or something, or disease, or scientists die and that sort of thing, then the measures can be reconstituted from measuring what's permanently put there, that is the monuments. So the monuments contain the measures, it's the Weights and Measures Bureau of the nation, as well as being a sort of a national temple as well. So it fulfills many functions. The monument fulfills many functions, but you can reconstitute the measures from the measurement of the temple. You see, the thing about the measurement system is it's so entirely natural, and it couldn't have evolved, if you see what I mean, because it's so integrated. No one part of it can exist without the rest of it. It's an entity, and it's there in the very earliest vestiges of civilization. Well, civilization is the building of a city, of course. But primitive man had a very sophisticated system of measurements that was preserved exactly as it was, and so it is quite easy to deconstruct it. There's two things called cubits. One is a 1.5 feet cubit, one is a 2 feet cubit. The Romans called the 2 feet cubit the decondium. So people sometimes get mixed up with these different kinds of cubits. For example, Royal Egyptian cubit is 5 to 6 with the so-called Jewish sacred cubit, and that was well known. I mean, Newton quoted that, and he quotes Josephus, which is ancient writers, ancient Hebrew writers, and they've got a relationship, like I say, of 5 to 6. But the thing is that once cubits get to be 1.8 feet long, they're in fact Dupondian, they're 2 feet cubits, not 1.5 feet cubits. 1.5 feet is generally accepted as being a cubit. This would be 1.5 feet of canonical man, and that would be, 1 feet 6 inches. And 4 of them would be his height, which is 6 feet. Canonical man is always 6 feet high. So if you do that, you've got 4 cubits. So that's
downstairs in the showroom, like a car showroom.
That's the 1.5 feet cubit, the 2 feet cubit Dupondian. You know exactly where the cut-off point is, because as soon as a measure, a module comes to be 1.8 feet, then it's a 2 feet cubit, and it's a 2 feet cubit of the Assyrian foot. All this terminology is a complete red herring, really. It's just like where these measures were found, but all the different measures were used in all the different nations because they're one entity. So what we just say, we call something a Roman foot because it was adopted by the Roman bureaucracy. It's like I say, that the 1.5 feet cubit of the Royal Egyptian cubit is 2 feet. It's a sacred cubit, or Jewish cubit, and but that's in actual fact a 2 feet measurement. So if you deconstruct that back to its original foot, and you deconstruct the 1.5 feet cubit back to its original foot, then you'll see that they've got a completely different relationship than the 5 to 6 that relates to cubits. They're basic measurement. So I can't give you the exact example, the exact fraction that relates to the feet measurements. But when you're studying metrology, you always relate the feet together, and never the multiples, because, like I say, what he calls a cubit isn't really a cubit. It's a Dupondian, it's a 2 feet measure. So anyway, that's basically cubits. But cubits can be, lots and lots of lengths because you've got lots and lots of feet. There's about 18 separate mathematical feet, and they all relate together by a fractional integration. So it's all the same system.